Hello, this is Paul, the Oak Knight, coming back to you with more commentary on gaming goodness. Today, let's take a look at the evolution of the U.S. Civil War, a game by Mark Simonich, published by GMT Games. In designing USCW, Mark took a great deal of inspiration from two prior releases, most particularly Eric Lee Smith's The U.S. Civil War, published by Victory Games in the 1980s. To begin, I'd like to take a brief step back in time to revisit the Civil War TCW, drawing some comparisons to how USCW refined and generally streamlined the system. Leadership and activation. At its inception, TCW was a landmark design taking an entirely new view of the conflict. Alternating player turns were gone. Instead, dice differentials drove the system forward, where each player rolled 2d6, with the difference between the two rolls becoming action points. That in turn paid for leader activation. Turns could be extended or immediately terminated when both players rolled the same result, with each successive match increasing the odds of ending the turn. Each leader had an activation rating that represented the number of activation points needed. Great leaders might require only 2 points to activate, while others 3 or 4. Now, all of a sudden, high initiative leaders with a 2 rating could run circles around those less gifted. Leaders like Robert E. Lee, U.S. Grant, and even John Bell Hood act like the energetic leaders they were in real life. The first edition of USCW both simplified and enhanced the concepts pioneered in TCW. 1d6 dice differential still drove the action, with all except a few cautious generals activating with a single differential point. Leader activation became more predictable, but it also smoothed out play as leaders could reliably activate and spar with one another. Initiative die roll matches allowed each player to draw one additional special action card to their hand. Turns consisted of a defined number of rounds, generally 4 per turn. The end of the turn was now defined and once again predictable, even if what could be accomplished during the turn was not. Leadership and combat. In addition to initiative, leader attributes in TCW include offensive and defensive die roll modifier ratings. Any number of leaders could be part of an army, and all would affect the die roll. Armies are formal organizations that must be paid for to create and can only be led by the most senior leaders. Army leaders are also rated, but their rating provides rerolls during combat rather than die roll modifiers. Both Army leader rerolls and subordinate leader die roll modifiers apply to combat. Leaders can become casualties and may be eligible for promotion should they survive a battle intact. Games could effectively end if too many high-performing senior leaders become KIA. And who would want to play the South without Bobby Lee? USCW simplifies combat leadership by getting rid of Army leader rerolls and only applying attack and defense DRMs from the Army leader plus 2 subordinates. Armies are more informal organizations that are primarily used as on-map stack replacements. Leader arrivals, promotions, demotions, removals, and leader kills are scheduled to coincide with actual history. Perhaps intentionally, perhaps not, there is no longer a used-up, worthless leader convention happening in Minnesota, since these guys are removed from the map per schedule. Reinforcements. TCW schedules reinforcements based on time, each turn listing the number per theater for both sides. The South gradually receives fewer reinforcements per turn, which in turn causes them to gradually lose territory. USCW flips this on its head. Instead, resource hexes are scattered about the entire South, and as they are lost, the number of reinforcements gradually diminishes. Combined with the excellent blockade mechanics, this is one of my favorite systems in the game. But be advised, should the Federals fail to capture objectives, the southern flow of reinforcements will never go down. Sudden death. TCW has a mechanism to end the war with a Southern victory if Lincoln loses re-election. By contrast, USCW adds an increasingly difficult sudden death hurdle that has to be met each and every turn of the game. Fail to do so, then you no longer have to worry about reinforcements. The game is over. To make matters even happier, the November 1864 presidential election raises the bar even higher for the Union player. And yes, sudden death cuts both ways. The Confederate States have their own numbers to meet. But all this is history. Now let's take a look at the new third edition, including some of the more important changes in the rules from the May 2017 second edition rules currently on the GMT website. The box is the usual GMT vessel of glossy goodness. The historic box art is great, while its 3-inch depth holds all other components in style. It does the job. The reverse box artwork also follows standard GMT practice with images of the map, the counters, and written marketing blurb on the game and general historic background. It's hard to believe that many games back in the day left the reverse of their game boxes blank. Complexity is rated a 6, solitaire a 5 out of 9. The page count, if not the complexity, has inflated across the 3 editions. The page count from 1st to 3rd edition is Basic Game with Basic Naval. 1st edition, 21 pages. 2nd edition, 25 pages. 3rd edition, 30 pages. Base Game with Advanced Naval. 1st edition, 24 pages. 2nd edition, 28 pages. 3rd edition, 35 pages. The complexity rating of 6 is about right, but in my view, the Advanced Naval Rules bump it up a notch to a 7. Continuing, the solitaire rating may be slightly conservative. The primary reason GMT rated it a 5 is the card play. That requires up to 5 cards to be held in secret. However, because only the phasing player can use a card, there is no back and forth card play, and solitaire play is not that affected by it. More on cards later. As a 3rd edition, the rules follow the same format and contain mostly the same content of earlier versions. Significant rule changes from the 2nd edition are flagged, and rules only applicable to Advanced Naval are also identified. The books are printed on a matte paper, unlike the more substantial glossy paper of the 1st edition. The paper is okay, but certainly not deluxe. The game has always featured a basic set of naval rules and an advanced section with a more detailed treatment that fully replaces the basic naval system. In his design notes, Mark tells us that the basic naval rules were not in the original design, and as a result, I suspect had to be retrofitted into the manual during playtesting. Even as late as the 2nd edition, the rules have struggled with how to incorporate basic naval into its organization. The Advanced Naval Rules had fewer issues because they were mostly confined to a dedicated advanced game section of the rulebook. Still, there was some connection with the base rule set, requiring certain rules within the base to be tagged as Advanced Naval. The 3rd edition makes a concerted effort to clean the rules up by making much clearer separation between the base rules, the naval rules, and the advanced. The confounding logic torture surrounding use of special action cards during naval operations is cleaned up, with naval card use appearing within the basic and naval rule sets. Same with naval transport, which can also in certain circumstances be used to mount amphibious assaults without the use of a special action card. The 3rd edition also goes so far as to pull the Advanced Naval Rules into a completely separate rulebook, which did not exist before. Further, all hooks linking the base rules to the Advanced Naval are clearly tagged. It appears the game has finally cleaned up the naval rule set so that players can figure them out without resorting to intense study and reading in between the lines. Better late than never. Counters are oversized and beautifully printed, identical to the earlier editions except for using a satin finish instead of a glossy finish. I like the new finish, especially when I am making a video as there is no light glare. The map is, thankfully, the same glorious work of art from the 1st edition. Get rid of the hexes and seams, and I'd frame it and hang it on the wall. Finally, the same player aids are provided in all versions. However, the 3rd edition does have some changes. The most important involve adding more of the various symbols that can determine the winner of a battle to the CRT. If both sides take the same number of casualties in a battle, the presence of one of the symbols on the result may give victory to one side or the other. Consider it a kind of tiebreaker, and the change will result in fewer drawn battles. Special action cards are primarily used to give beneficial DRMs to the attacker. Note that they are only played by the phasing player, which is why they do not damage solitaire play all that much. The new edition backs off on a rule requiring decks to be reshuffled each and every time a card is used, instead making the reshuffle optional. If anyone actually followed the old rule, their cards no doubt would have been shredded into dust. Honestly, wouldn't a shit draw system as used by Revolution Games' Blind Sword system be a better way to do the same thing? You never ever need to reshuffle chits. Just pop the counter in the cup, shake, and repeat. I'm considering making counters and bagging the cards for future gameplay. Without getting into the weeds, the various changes to the rulebook generally fall into three categories. First, Naval Rule reorganization and clarification. We've already discussed this. Second, small rule tweaks, such as no longer allowing rail movement into an enemy's zone of influence even when there exists a friendly force on the destination rail hex. And caution generals possibly no longer being cautious if the South is mounting an invasion of the North. Best of all, the dreaded source of provisions rule was eliminated, with a small change in the isolation rules taking its place. I swear that source of provisions had to originate from a rabid playtester. Third, changes slightly rebalancing the game in favor of the Confederates. Some examples. 1. The most severe row on the supply attrition table is gone, so that unsupplied units will suffer less attrition. Second, the +2M result on the blockade table, a permanent and never decreasing maintenance tax on the Southern economy, appears much less frequently. Third, the CSA no longer is required to remove strength points on the map if recruiting in winter yields a negative result. And finally, my bottom line game assessment. At first, I could not do it. At its release, I just could not come out and say that the venerable and venerated TCW had been replaced as the best strategic treatment of the war. Yes, it had cleaned up virtually every gripe I had with Eric's TCW, but it had in parts introduced new ones. Now, with the third edition of USCW, I can endorse it as the best ever without reservation. Yeah, there are some things missing that I liked, but on the whole, it provides a smoother and more reliable playing experience without the rabbit holes that plagued TCW. Finally, while I have played both versions of the Naval Rules, I have to confess that I like the basic rules better than the advanced rules and recommend that you give them a try. They represent a magnificent design for effect over the more detail-oriented advanced rules. Turns out that in the scope of the entire Civil War, I don't really want to figure out when to use low coal markers on individual ship counters. Go figure. Anyway, if you have interest in the topic, I recommend that you get yourself a copy now while prices are reasonable. Well, my friends, that's all I have for today. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. It helps me provide great content for your viewing pleasure, and it gives you handy access to the channel. So, this is Paul, the Oka Knight, wishing you a pleasant evening. Thanks for watching, everyone. Bye-bye.